pitch here. And now let's move to the racetrack. And here's an example of some of America's most famous racing iron. The longest running professional road racing series in America, the Trans Am. We have examples of Javelins, Mustangs, Barracudas, Cougars, Camaros, and nearly every one with great racing provenance.
And look at them thunder up and over the hill and down into the hairpin. 305 cubic inches, upwards of 500 horsepower, and these historic cars carefully regulated to make sure that they are faithful to their origins. And look, the competition's every bit as good as it was in 1970.
Right up front, Jamie Mazzata in the number 16 and Terry Miller in number 7 getting after it.
Classic battle, Bob. Chevy versus Ford. These cars had to start out as production machines and be modified into racers. These were not rather not tube frame cars. Now, they were street cars converted, so they looked just like what was in the showroom. This was road racing, win on Sunday, sell on Monday at its best.
Mazzata takes the lead. Look at this battle for third. Jim Halsey in the 61, the 15 Brian Farron, and the 22 of Gary Geringer. What a great engine note. How many of you out there can recall going to the racetrack to see the likes of the late Mark Donahue or Peter Revson or Parnelli Jones racing these cars on all of America's great road courses?
Well, that's my hand you see raised. It was just great to sit on the hillsides at Lime Rock, Bridgehampton, Watkins Glen, and Briar and see these cars go back in the day.
Now, we've spoken in the past, and we will again, about how these are authentic vintage cars. They don't handle like modern day race cars. Mike, I know you've driven some of these Trans Am machines. What are they like?
Well, there's a great variety, Bob, but mostly they're big, heavy cars. There's a lot of roll front to rear and roll over on the right side, as you see that Mustang in third place doing right now, Halsey's car. But they've got a lot of power. They've got a lot of torque, so they launch off the corner really well. Getting down into the corner, that's another matter.
And down into the corner they go. Andretti turn here at Laguna Seca. There's a look at our current standings. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the 33rd Annual Rolex Monterey Historics. We have American Trans Am iron on track and a great battle up front. Jamie Mazzota battling Terry Miller. Ford against Chevy.
You know, that 16 looks just like when it was piloted by George Fulmer. Those cars were built by Bud Moore in South Carolina. Lanky Fouché, who went on to Group 44, was the crew chief. Parnelli Jones and Fulmer were the factory drivers in 1970 in those butterscotch-colored Boss 302s.
And that's what we mean when we talk about great provenance. Great names from racing past who drove these cars in the day.
And some of them still do, like Dick Goldstrand, battling Ed Dwyer in that number 13 Warren Agor Camaro. Goldstrand's in the 99.
It's for 23rd place.
This is a 1967 Chevy Camaro, but with a great story. In 1968, the Chaffee College, which was just above Ontario Motor Speedway, purchased the car so that their students could have a course in race tech. Now, the students weren't allowed to drive it for insurance purposes, so the college had to rent in other drivers like Bob Bondurant, Dick Gilstrand, and would you believe, Paul Newman. Well, here at Laguna Seca, Paul Newman much regrets not being able to turn up to drive it. Bob Bondurant's here, but he's recovering, thank goodness, from heart surgery. So Chaffee College might like to know that Dick Gilstrand, 80 years old, is still driving their car today. How about that?
How about that indeed? Not one, but four great racing names over the door of that particular Camaro. Goldstrand in it here, giving it a drive and getting some smoke out the back of that Camaro.
A little tire smoke off the left rear. He's really charging and running that car hard to keep ahead of Ed Dwyer.
Now we move to the battle for 16th, and the number 14, a 67 Cougar, is John Hildebrand. And racing him is a famous name both inside and outside the car, Vic Edelbrock, and a 69 Boss 302 Mustang.
Now, this was a Ford factory team car in 1969, painted in the appropriate colors. And chances are one of Vic's intake manifolds is on most of the cars in this field.
Another great element of the Monterey Historic, seeing these cars and their drivers brought back together once again.
You don't need me to tell you that when the name Edelbrock gets mentioned, Everybody thinks of the wonderful performance modifications that the company makes, but they do also own a couple of very lovely, tasty, historic Trans Am cars. Vic Edelbrock will be driving car number 16. That's his ex-Ford Motor Company, George Fulmer-driven Trans Am Boss 302 Mustang, and he'll be up against his daughter, Cammy, in her Smoky Unit-prepared 1968 Trans Am Camaro. Now, there's an awful lot of love in this family, I know, between fathers and daughters, but I can tell you, it can change to competition when they get on the track. There is a rumor that when Vic was in the lead one year, right here at Laguna Seca, one of his plug leads mysteriously fell off the spark plug. Suspicious? I say no more.
I think Alan's been seeing those black helicopters that Darrell sees on Sunday afternoon.
I think Smokey Unick might be proud of the way Cammy, and what else would Vic Edelbrock name his daughter but Cammy? Watching Edelbrock in action, closing on the 98 of Jim Shield. He's in 15th in that 1967 Cougar.
And that's a former Dan Gurney-driven car because Mercury also had a factory team in Trans Am. Let's get back up front.
Still at it. The 16 of Jamie Mazzotta and Terry Miller. And now Miller with a slight advantage on the infield.
Mazzotta's got the best car here, and it's 3 years newer than Miller's car. And in Trans Am racing, and that was a whole generation of development. So for Terry Miller to hold off the 1970 car, that is quite a feat.
Trans Am now in its 40th year. Not quite like the golden age, represented by these cars. We'll be back in a moment to Laguna. This moment in time is presented by Rolex.
At the turn of the 20th century, cross-country road racing was the rage in Europe. This Dédion Bouton was specially constructed to compete in the 1903 Paris-Madrid race. At 3 a.m., 220 cars left Paris in front of 250,000 people. Nearly 2 million people lined the route, but tragedy struck. Among the carnage, 8 dead, 12 seriously injured. Marcel Renault perished at the wheel of his car. And the race was stopped at what was to be the first overnight point in Bordeaux. The citizens were so outraged, the cars were not allowed to leave town under their own power and were shipped back to Paris by rail. Cross-country road racing was over.
Proof once again that motor racing is indeed the original extreme sport. Speaking of which, back to the Trans Am Golden Oldie battle. Jamie Mazzotta in that Boss 302 Mustang has reassumed the lead.
Miller giving good chase, and John McClintock's number 70 Mustang around the outside for second. This race is part of a 4-race tour that includes Lime Rock and Watkins Glen to help celebrate the 40th anniversary of Trans Am. And once again, folks get to fill the hillsides and watch these great cars go at it.
What a thrill that must be to see these cars in person as we are here at Laguna Seca, being raced hard by drivers who know how to do it.
Ken Epsman's the leader of this group, and he kind of says, we put on a great show, but we do it at full throttle. Tom McIntyre kind of heads up the rules enforcement, and Brian Farron, all the transportation to get these cars around the country. But look, lead change. McClintock
once more as he dives underneath Mazzotta as they climb the hill to turn 6.
Well, you know, if there's any contact, Bob, you're out for a year, for 13 months. So you've got to give that other driver enough room for his race car, and that makes for an entertaining show.
I imagine tuning these cars as you see Miller now taking a shot at Mazzotta. I don't think he'll get to him before they dive down the corkscrew. You've got to have good mechanical help to maintain these vintage race cars, I'm guessing.
Yep, a fellow named Scott Rubin, McGee Motorsports, maintains a lot of them at Sears Point. But let's see, as we're getting close here, if Mazzotta can put on a final charge and retake the lead in this final lap. One turn to go.
And look at the field closing up behind. Here comes Mazzotta. Will he take a look? Underneath. Off the corner they come.
Got him. What a bold move by Jamie Mazzotta. Miller for second. McClintock third.
Oh, my.
As the lead changes hands a couple of times on that final lap.
So McClintock goes from third to first and back to third, and his arm is out the window saluting the fans, all in good fun, but all the same, good hard racing with these fabulous old Trans Am cars.
Well, it might not have been Parnelli Jones and Mark Donahue and Dan Gurney and George Fulmer, but you couldn't tell it from here, could you?
Not a bit. Great Boss 302 Mustang sandwiching Terry Miller's Camaro Z28. As the drivers take their cool-down lap, here's a look at the final results. Dan Lippitz finishes fourth.